Hello, you're listening to the Dukes of Horror podcast.
The podcast about the movies, legends, and stories that keep you up at night.
I'm horror author H.H. Duke.
And I'm her little brother, the filmmaker Screwloose. Welcome to the Dukes of Horror podcast.
I don't know if I told you this, but I've been kind of rewatching the miniseries Rose Red. Do you remember that?
No, I do not. What was it? Have I seen it?
Well, it's Stephen King's Rose Red. It's like a miniseries that I think it premiered in like the 90s. It was like on television. It had the girl who was who played Barney in Halloween Town was in it.
Sure.
Well, that miniseries was something that like really scared me as a kid. And so I thought we could kind of maybe start out by talking about like stuff that scared us a lot when we were children that like we remember.
Sure.
Like, do you have anything that comes to mind?
Well, I didn't really think about this beforehand, but little things, when Halloween would always come around, Dad would drag me down the mask aisle and scare the crap out of me. So that was something that stands out.
I remember chasing you around wearing a mask.
You say that one, but yeah.
You might not remember it, but I remember it. I did it once or twice, and maybe you blacked it out. Maybe that's part of the reason you're so into horror now, though. Who knows?
Probably. I don't know. Just owning the fear, I guess. I don't know. I was never into masks. Like our cousins, they had that devil mask that they had at their house, and they'd always scare me for the longest time with it.
Yeah, I remember them putting you on that and putting that on and scaring you. And I think at that point I'd matured a little bit and I felt kind of bad about it.
Yeah. I remember one time they're dragging me into a room because they want to show me something. They had got a guinea pig, but I was convinced they were dragging me in there to show me the devil mask. And I was fighting them. I did not want to go, but I was small enough to be picked up, so it didn't really work out that well. Yeah.
It's crazy the things that scare you when you're a kid that like when you get older and you're like, this really isn't scary at all.
Yeah.
But I guess when you're a kid, that line between reality and what's fake is kind of blurred. So it makes sense that kind of stuff scares you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think masks are still scary. I think I just got used to it. I mean, yeah, masks are scary. So what can you do? I guess also real quick, the other things that stand out. I mean, after we're done recording this, I'm sure I'll come up with a million other things. I'm like, oh yeah. I just remember there's two scenes from movies that to this day I still don't like watching. The one scene is in Blade. There's this moment where this gal gets thrown down into this pit with, I guess it's like a zombie vampire. Like they just say like sometimes people get bit and they just don't turn out right. So they have the zombie vampire down there and the girl gets chucked into this pit and it's rising up and it's just all like creepy and scary and it like kind of has this roar voice like it's like Sarah. And like I just remember I was thinking that was scary. It was like it's a pit also, like it was hard for her to get out. I'm just like, oh god. Then the other was also, this one isn't even totally horror, but it was the Punisher movie they made a number of years ago. But there's a scene where a guy gets tortured and they're pulling out his piercings, and for some reason never liked that scene. Yeah, those two scenes scared me.
Yeah, I've never seen either of those movies, but like they both seem very visceral. Like, not that you'd ever get thrown into like a pit with a bunch of zombie vampires, but like being trapped like that with something that's trying to hurt you or could hurt you, or like being tortured. I don't know. Yeah, both of those are things that just make your stomach kind of squirm.
Yeah. I mean, the scenes are executed in a way too. I mean, I'm sure I've seen torture scenes before and I've seen zombies before, but something about those two scenes stuck. They were extra creepy. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So we'll juxtapose like the types of things that you just described. And there was like a few things that scared me when I was a kid, but there's two movies that come to mind like right away. And one of them is the Mothman Prophecies. Do you remember that movie with like Richard Gere based on the actual Mothman happenings?
I remember when you guys watched it And I think you like I remember you guys talking about it and how like scary it was. No, you got to see this scene. So I'm guessing the scene you're going to talk about is maybe I shouldn't wreck it because I'm pretty sure one of the scenes.
Yeah, you probably know the scene. It's the scene where like Richard Gere is like talking on his phone in front of like a closet mirror. Like there's a mirror on the inside of a closet. He's like at a hotel and he's like talking on his phone and you can see his reflection in the mirror is kind of doing what he's doing, but it's like slightly off. It's slightly off and then he's not looking at it so he doesn't see it and then he slams the door and there's just like a split second where you see like a face that I guess is supposed to be I don't know what it's supposed to be because I don't think it's Mothman, but
I thought it
that
was the
scared me.
Mothman.
I mean, it
I
could
mean,
be, but like I don't know why he'd be in your closet. That movie took a lot of liberties, but it did scare the crap out of me.
well,
I
because I
remember
guess
like
I
go ahead.
assume the intention would be that the Mothman is essentially always there watching. Like that was supposed to be the spooky part about it was, oh, so apparently he's just there, you know, and you don't necessarily know it.
I was just kind of watching. Yeah, I think that's sort of the vein that they took in the movie, and also like the book that it was based on, which was supposed to be real, but I don't think a lot of it was actually. I think a lot of it the author just made up. But yeah, I remember like for like a week after watching that movie, I slept with the lights on, and I would have like my radio playing at night.
Yeah.
And the other movie, and I'm interested if you even remember this movie, but the other movie that really scared me was a movie called Darkness Falls.
Yep. That one scared me too. I don't know. That one stuck out. I mean, that's the one with the it's supposed to be the tooth fairy, but if you see it, then so it can only be in the darkness. So if you see it, it's coming after you for the rest of your life. So you have to stay in the light,
Yeah.
which would be a horrible way to live because yeah, I know sometimes I've watched a scary movie where it's like, all right, you need a light on somewhere. And it's just if you have a light on, it wrecks your sleep. So that guy must not have had a very good life. Or who knows, maybe you adjust to it, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you I mean, you might get a little used to it, but I don't like think you can ever really adjust to being in the light 24/7.
Yeah.
But yeah, that movie scared me so much and that was another one where I slept with the lights on for a good week or two. And like
Yeah.
watching it now, I don't know if you've seen it since, but it is not a good movie.
Oh really?
Yeah, it's not
Maybe I
good.
maybe I will have to watch it because it just seems like that movie will get brought up to random people like, hey, do you remember that horror movie where it was like a tooth fairy, but she's evil and you know, she can only be in the dark and you have to stay in the light or else it'll get you. And people will be like, oh, yeah, I saw that. That scared me as a kid. So who knows? Maybe I do need to give it a watch because at least when I was a kid, I'm like, I think this is maybe just the how kind of scary it was at the time or seemingly scary, like overshadowed that maybe it wasn't a good movie, but who knows?
I think the concept was good. And obviously it was scary, like at least scary to kids. But like a lot of it just wasn't it wasn't like a top tier movie. It was like a B movie. But it has a place in my heart. But anyway, like speaking of stuff that scared us when were kids, today's topic are is the books Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Do you remember those books, John? Obviously you do because we're talking about them.
Oh, yeah, I figured that was essentially what your segue was leading up to was scary stories. Yeah, mom used to read these to us growing up, and I don't know. They were creepy as a kid, definitely, but revisiting them, like hearing them again, I was kind of like, these things are like way more gruesome for kids than I kind of imagined they'd be. It was very actually kind of interesting, you know?
Yeah, like this is something that I don't know that would be like I don't think it would be published like with children as the intended audience today because like I was rereading them too and a lot of them they do kind of have like a jokey nature but the subject matter is very very dark like you've got cannibalism, there's like death, there's rotting bodies.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I don't know if there's a joking nature to them at all, just because, like, I mean, I only read the first book. Actually, I listened to it. They have like a audiobook version narrated by Patton Oswalt on Spotify. So I was listening to that. And well, it's broken up. The first book is broken up into three parts. Like the first part is kind of like, I can't remember specifically the titles, but like ghosts and like dead things. And then the second is monsters, and then the third is like modern horror, essentially. It's just like the first story, which is probably one of the more iconic stories, is the big toe, and you also just kind of understand the just the stories you're dealing with, and why I'm saying like I don't think there's a jokey matter to these at all. It's just like, all right, a kid finds a toe, rips it out of the ground, and the family's like, "What a plump toe! We'll eat it."
Isn't that nuts?
Like,
Like I reread
yeah.
that one too, and I was like, that is not the reaction that I would have if my kid brought home a toe that they found.
Well, all the stories really kind of like some like because if you listen to the bibliography at the end, they all these stories are kind of like written or pulled from like kind of old classic stories, like reworked in certain ways. Sometimes they're very close to the original story. Um, like what's that other one where like the head comes? It's called a Mitai or Doti Walker. So that's
Yeah,
the one where the
Mitai
bloody
Doty
head comes.
Walker. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one where bloody head comes down the chimney, and the dog starts talking. Like he hears, I guess, the head out in the woods singing, and the dog just starts talking. It just kind of a bizarro world is how I describe for a lot of these stories. It's surreal. So like, yeah, people are like, oh yeah, we can just eat this toe, or hey, my dog starts talking, stuff like that. Which seems like it would be a little bit like, oh, this is kind of for children, but it's dark, dark and creepy and morbid.
Absolutely. And I do think that like books, because this was like the first one came out in 1981, and I do think books and even like television for children were allowed to be a lot darker than they are now. Um, and I don't know, personally, I think like books like this serve a purpose because they introduce kids to like darkness and death and like these bad, like macabre topics in like a safe way. So I mean, I don't really know. Like I work in a library and I don't really think there's anything else out there like these books now, which is probably why they're so iconic
Yeah.
and they're still
Well,
in the library.
I'm not sure why these stories though didn't bother me more as a kid because again, listening to them, it's like they're kind of nightmare feel, especially that like the opening stories that it's all about like corpses coming back to life and the description of these corpses, and then you have the iconic illustrations for scary stories to tell in the dark, which those are just gruesome and creepy to begin with. I'm pretty sure I thought in recent years they republished these books without those images because people had decided, oh, this is how did we let kids have these books back in the day? It's
Yeah,
like we can still give them the stories, but we can't have this imagery. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I like at least I heard somebody was pushing to get that done.
oh, they did. Yeah.
Oh, they did.
They republished these books. I'm not sure exactly how long ago. I think maybe like 10 years ago. With illustrations done by Brett Helquist, and he's the guy who did the covers for a series of unfortunate events.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very much in the same like style as the covers of those books. And I mean, they're all good, they're all beautiful, but they're not the same as the illustrations from the original illustrations who were done by an artist called Stephen Gamble.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're just like they're more like scenes, like the whole page is filled out. I personally actually think the pictures are the most terrifying part of this book.
Yeah.
They're all like they're just all so weird. Like it's almost like there'll be like a figure and like basically a white background with like smudges, and there'll be like dirt and veins and like just like stuff hanging down, and you get almost like the feeling that these things just kind of like floated up out of the earth, out of like some nightmare dimension, and they all are like looking at you kind of, so it's almost like they're coming for you rather than whoever the person is in the story, and I think that's like what makes them like so effective.
Oh yeah. I mean, the images definitely lay the tone. I remember the one that mom had. I'm not sure what the original cover was for at least the first volume of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but Mom had a version that had the corpse woman from the story The Haunted House. Was that the name of
Hmm.
it? Let me make sure.
The one with
Yeah,
like
from
the priest and everything.
yeah, where the priest goes to, I guess, put an end to this haunted house, and the corpse woman comes back. But basically, like, it describes the story, like what she looks like, and the cover of this book was just that corpse woman's face. Yeah, that was creepy. Which, I guess, while we're on the topic of that, I do think probably the standout story for me is that one. I like that story for some reason because it's creepy, like scary, her coming out of the basement. But I also kind of like that there's the priest who's a good guy, and then there's a bad guy, and I guess just kind of the dynamic of when the corpse and the priest come to an understanding that it's like I'll help you, you help me type thing. I know there's
Hmm.
something I like about that character dynamic.
It's more of a story. Like it has, like you said, like a good guy, a bad guy, and a resolution. Like a lot of the stories in this book, they kind of end like mid-action because it's what keeps it scary. Because like the more you know about something, the more something's explained, like the less scary it becomes.
Yeah,
But yeah, that one definitely has like the not I won't say the most because I didn't reread all the stories, so I can't be 100% sure of that statement, but it does have like the most story elements in it of all the ones that I reread.
yeah,
Um, and I agree, like that picture of that corpse, like the skeletal corpse with like the teeth visible and like the empty eye sockets. I think that's like the scariest image from the book. And I had that book. It was like Scary Stories Treasury, so it was like a treasury of like all the most popular stories. I had that in my room, and I had to make sure that that book was like not facing me when I went to sleep because it was so creepy.
yeah. Scary story treasury. That maybe that explains because there's some stories. Again, I just listened to the first one for this. Like I heard all the stories, but there is a bunch of stories that seemed like the more iconic ones that weren't in this first volume. So I'm like, I know I heard those stories, but yeah, that's kind of I don't remember reading two or three. So I guess it was the treasury was best of or yeah
Yeah, I
best
had
of
that
version
same
of it.
experience too because I was trying to figure out like which one we had read, like which one we owned, but all of the ones that I read, like I recognized a lot of them through from each of the books. So it made sense when I figured out that we had like a special treasury version.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, at least when that movie came out. So the movie came out recently, which I think it's all right, but opposed to doing like a episodic, like let's just tell the short stories, they did some story about elements from these characters, come back, whatever. But you have the I remember the story about the girl who gets the pimple and spiders start coming out of it. That wasn't in the volume that I listened to. Also, there's the one with the scarecrow. I always remember the image from that one. The image there, the scarecrow comes back. And also then there's the big old, I don't know, kind of like really fat woman. I can't remember that story, but I remember the picture from that.
well,
Yeah, weren't in this first volume.
yeah, and actually like those three, like the ones that they used for that movie, I feel like they weren't in the treasury at all. So maybe that treasury came before the third book came out because I think those ones were from the third book.
Okay.
Like I when I went to go see that movie, I was like, I have no idea who this scarecrow is. I have no idea who this fat giggling woman is. Um, and like as I was rereading, because when I was doing the research for this, I was like, I want to know what those stories were that were in that movie. So I made sure to reread those stories. Um, and they took a lot of liberties with that movie because it seems like what they did is they took the images from the movie more than they took the stories.
Yeah.
Because like the pale woman, like that's what the fat woman is called. She's in a story called The Dream, and
Hmm.
basically like the main character has a dream where she goes somewhere and she sees this pale woman, and that woman says, "Get out of here! This place is bad." Um, and then she wakes up, and then she goes to a place, and she ends up seeing that woman, and then she leaves, which has like absolutely nothing to do with what happens in the movie, the Guillermo del Toro movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I feel like the other stories they were very different than what was in the book too. But
Yeah.
I do love that scene in the Guillermo del Toro movie with the pale woman where she's like, um, they're like in a hospital and there's one character who's trying to get away from her. And every time he turns down a hallway, she's there and she's just like inching towards him, like giggling, giggling, giggling.
Yeah.
It's probably the best scene in that movie.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the cool things about the books as well is at least more of the like the ghost corpse stories do very well with suspense. Like something getting closer, like the big toe. It's like, who has my big toe as it gets closer and closer. So maybe that was Gilmore del Toro pulling from that. Or in the one with the bloody head. Yeah, you hear it singing in the woods and then it's getting closer and closer. And yeah, these did pretty good with the suspense. Or the haunted house again. That one's my favorite. Like I remember when mom told it that one. I for some reason vaguely remember mom reading that as a child, like kind of being there because something about the thing in the basement is stirring all of a sudden, and it's gonna come up the stairs and the door is opening, and tell me what you want. Like I don't know, good suspense. So I don't know that scene you're describing reminds me of kind of that classic element from those books.
Mm-hmm.
Something that made them stand out.
Sure.
Suspense.
I also remember like I don't know like feel like you, me, and mom would be like lying in one of our beds and she would be reading these to us.
Hmm.
One weird thing, it's not a weird thing, but one thing like I noticed while reading this is how many of these stories like end and like and then turn to whoever's sitting next to you and scream
Yeah, pretty
in
much
like
like all the stories in
parentheses.
the beginning. Yeah, pretty much all the stories in the beginning have like a interactive jump scare element to it. So that's kind of cool. It makes you kind of consider wanting to do that one day. It's like, oh, maybe during October, I'll do like a scary story, you know, recital type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think especially the first book was meant to be like read at like a sleepover or around a fireplace. I
Yeah.
mean, it's right there in the title, right? But
Hmm.
yeah.
The one thing I'd say about him is maybe it's cool that it's all kind of segmented again. Like the beginning is kind of like jump scare stories, but most of them are about like dead bodies and stuff like that, ghosts coming back. Then the second book is more like monsters. Like there's the story I like A New Horse, which is just seems like a very kind of classic like folklore witch story about how this witch comes at night and turns a guy into a horse and rides him around. And so finally this guy one ups her by, you know, being able to turn back from a horse into a human. Then he turns her into a horse and then trades her to her husband. And then when the husband comes back to like see his new horse, it's just the woman's there with horseshoes nailed to her hands and feet. Like that just seems like kind of a folklore story from like back in the day. Story about witches and werewolves and stuff that made people like kind of scared in medieval times, right?
Hmm.
Then you also have like the Wendigo story. You have the alligators, so you got the monsters. You move into the third book, which is supposed to be more modern horror. So you got like the Hook, which everyone's heard the Hook story. Also, like High Beams. You've heard the story about the woman's being stalked home by some car that's blasting the beams, and then the twist at the end is the guy was actually saving her from a killer in the back seat. Whenever the killer goes up to kill her, the guy saves her by turning the high beams on. It's like that's actually a really good story. I like that one. And the babysitter, some guy's up in the twist is somebody's up in the attic been calling, and like finally the police are like, oh god, we traced the call, it's upstairs, and the guy's coming down the stairs. That's also a good story. And then finally at the end, then you have a fourth section that's like funny stories. Like I remember mom telling the Viper story when we were a kid. Like I'm the Viper. I'm coming to Vipe, stuff like that. But he's
Yeah.
really just the window cleaner. Um, I think that's all cool. I mean, I feel like the way they did it, where they segmented all these sections off, was probably the way to do it. But I could also, at least for like the first three, it might have been cooler if they just kind of mixed them up. It's like, all right, you got a corpse story. All right, you got a monster story. All right, here's a modern thing. But who knows? Maybe the way they did it was actually better.
Maybe easier to find what you're looking for.
Hmm.
If your intent is really to like read some of these around a fire or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, it was done for a reason, it would seem. I know. I guess I did kind of wish they would have done more of like an episodic, like when they made the movie. I mean, I think they just don't think episodic anything does very well. So I mean, they did this with like Goosebumps and other stories where it's like, all right, we're gonna pull elements, but there's gonna be a main storyline. It's not just gonna be like episodic episodes. I don't think they think it's good for getting people to follow along with an entire series. I'm assuming that's why, but
Yeah, I don't know. Like maybe they could do a creep show style show about like I mean that would be I think that would work. Creep show is pretty successful. I mean it's not, prime time or anything, but I think amongst the horror community, creep show has done well, and I think this
yeah.
subject matter would translate to that.
Well, I'm surprised they don't do it because it just like it seems like it's easy to lend itself, or maybe they're just like, if we stick to the stories too much, people are know what's going to happen. Maybe they won't like that. However, like yeah, Creep Show, not X Files, um, Twilight Zone, um, Tales from the Crypt. Those
Hmm.
were all shows that did the episodic thing and did it pretty well. So I just feel like I don't know, Goosebumps and also Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark probably should have been given their chance as episodic versions of all the like the books or stories, and they didn't go for that, which is a little bit of a letdown for me. But maybe I need to watch that movie again. I think I watched it in passing, like I was probably like working on a film script or something and had it on in the background. So kind of watched it, but also didn't watch it because I can't remember it that much. I just remember they go into a house, find some book of this like woman's stories, and then characters from these stories start appearing in real life and are getting people. So yeah.
It's just weird that they insist so much on having like an overarching story to like connect everything together, but the overarching story is so weak.
Yeah.
And it is pretty weak. Like you, I didn't really remember what happened. I remembered like there was some woman who died in a house and like she was the one who was haunting everybody and making all these things happen. But like it wasn't until I went and like looked up the plot for the movie again that I really like recalled what had happened.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Total agreement. Hmm. What else is there to say about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? Was there anything that stood out to you, like story wise, or
I think we talked about pretty much all of the stories that like really that I really remembered, like the Spot, Mitai Dodi Walker, the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a little weird because the story like that's in the book, that's not actually like the lore of the Wendigo. The Wendigo is like a person, from Native American folklore who has eaten human flesh, and they turn into like a ravenous. I don't want to like I don't really know too much, so I don't want to say anything, especially for a culture that isn't mine. But it's like about what happens if you are a cannibal. And in the book, it's like this person gets picked up and dragged along by a flying creature who like drops them. And then at the end, for some reason, another person who was in the story like goes and he finds someone who's wrapped up and he thinks it's that person and he pulls off his coat and it's just like a pile of ashes.
yeah,
Did you reread that story? Like I was like, hmm.
yeah. I don't remember hearing that one as a kid. That one was kind of new. I think the story was good. I mean, I was able to go along with their version of the Wendigo because I'm like maybe there's different versions in Native American folklore, or just maybe the Wendigo is able to do different things based on the story. Because the story, as far as Wendigo goes, they don't really describe the Wendigo or what makes it what it is. I mean, I assume it's a monster, just like the Wendigo would be in the version you're telling, where somebody is partaken in cannibalism and it turns them into a vicious monster. I mean, it could still be that. I guess I've just, like you said, never seen a version where I guess he moves so fast that then he eventually can fly, like just yank you up in the air and apparently drop you. But I thought it was a cool story. Um, yeah, I need to learn more about the Wendigo story because I've seen versions where they depict the Wendigo as being like not even like a beast, but more of like a skeletal thing, like almost like a deer with
Yeah, I've
it's
seen
like a
that
deer
too.
skull and horns. So I'd have to see the version because also it seems like the folklore of like the Wendigo and Skinwalkers also gets kind of swapped around to fill people's need to tell a story or whatever to fit the story they're trying to write. So yeah, who knows? It's interesting. Yeah, that was a story that definitely stood out. Some are kind of weird as well, like the alligators. Like, all right, this woman marries a guy who keeps going down to the river and is apparently turning into alligators, and then wants to bring their son down and turn him into an alligator.
Mm,
And then she eventually just they lock her up because they think she's insane, but the father and son are never seen from again. Except people occasionally see alligators in the river.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's another
Or
one
the other
where I remember like the illustration more than the story because that alligator that they show is just it looks so mean.
yeah. Also, actually, this was another really good story, but room for one more. A guy travels to a big city for work, and at night he wakes up and a hearse, like a hearse full of people, rolls up, and the creepy driver says there's room for one more. And the guy doesn't go, the hearse leaves, and then the next day he's about to get on an elevator and it's full, and somebody goes, there's room for one more. And it was the driver of the hearse, and he's like, I'll wait for the next one. And then the elevator drops down the shaft and everyone dies.
Oh, yeah,
That
that's
was
a
a good
good
story.
one. That is a good
Hmm.
one.
Yeah. It's creepy. I mean, again, like partially it's the description. I mean, we've had this discussion in previous, stories about, movies and books. Like a really good movie can really draw you in, but sometimes books give you that ability to imagine it. It's like I'll give you a little bit description. It's like this is a horrible looking creepy man, and you get to fill in what that is for you. Which also makes it kind of hard when you try to adapt books from time to time. Because like I'm surprised everyone agreed with Harry Potter so well, because like Harry Potter, for instance, like it was so iconic that when they finally were like, all right, let's do this live action, everyone was like, all right, that's exactly like the book, right? Versus like something like this, what does the creepy hearse driver actually look like? You could get
Hmm.
people upset where it's like that hearse driver is not what I imagined. But yeah.
I think the Harry Potter movies were like they were so close to what people had imagined because J.K. Rowling was so involved in the creation of those movies in a way that most authors who have their work optioned and turned into films don't get to do. So that's why I think that's the case.
For sure.
But that's probably what the
Proven.
world wants for their Harry Potter.
Yeah. Even Lord of the Rings was also one where I know people just seem to agree with what they did, at least the movies,
They
until
are
they try
very
to
beloved.
reboot.
Yes.
Yeah, they did it well. Well, any closing thoughts about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? I'll probably have to get this. I realized the other day, I'm like, I want to try and get a copy of all the Goosebumps, try and get a copy of this. Just, I don't know, collect and curate the important things, I think, from when I was a child. You know what I mean?
Hmm. I
Because
was
I
thinking
know,
that too. Yeah.
I wonder if mom still has these at her house because she has a bookshelf with a bunch of books. So I don't know how that would get thrown out, but sometimes when we were growing up, Dad would throw things out, like he'd throw out all the VHSs of the Disney movies. And then it turned out those are worth a lot of money, so joke's on you,
Yeah.
apparently.
She probably still has this one. I know she's been downsizing lately, but I think she still has all of like the important books.
Sure. Indeed, indeed.
Anyway, I think we need a rule, and this book is like chock full of them. It's basically like a don't do this if you want to live manual. Don't
Mhm.
be pulling up toes out of the ground. Definitely don't be eating them. Just all the good stuff. But definitely
Yep.
go buy this book. No, you don't have to buy it, but read it. You can also like I think John, you listen to it on Spotify. You can listen to it on YouTube. It's out there. Consume
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Show it to your children.
Yep. Keep scary stories to tell in the dark alive.
Yeah.
Moral of the story. Alrighty. Good episode. Talk to you later, everybody.
Goodbye.